Hey, this is Michael Gilbert from Flotsam and Jetsam, and you're listening to Focus on Metal.
Focus on Metal!
Hey, Metalhead, Scott Thompson here, welcoming you to another dose of Focus on Metal. So before we get into this week's episode, just want to let you know that if you missed the last episode, we had a great talk with Jeff Pilson, all about stuff going on with just about every damn thing that he's doing, with the notable exception of Dawkins. I guess that's kind of been fairly well covered lately on social media, so why bother with that one? So if you missed that, go up to focusonmetalpod.com and check out episode 587. But this week, my old bandmate and former original Focus on Metal partner, Jay, is back on board to do a little bit of a Metallica discussion. Over the last few weeks, we've been tossing back and forth topics, and Jay just happened to ask about, discussing Metallica bassists and how they relate to the eras of the band, and it was kind of a loose concept that we, as we talk, molded it into something. So definitely a longer episode this week to make up for the short episode last week, I guess. So knowing it's a long discussion, why don't we get into it? All right, Focus on Metal listeners, reaching back into the old Focus on Classic Metal ethos, and Jay had hit me up a little while ago about discussion about Metallica bassists, their influences, and all that good stuff. So on the line once again is Jay. How you doing, man?
Hey, doing good. Nice to be talking about this one. I know it's one that I mentioned to you in the past, and I don't think people may even realize how many bassists have actually been in Metallica. So
yeah,
it'll be a good topic.
That's true, and it's interesting too because this is. I mean, I come at this a little bit as having played bass for a long time as well, and you've played guitar and been a long time Metallica fan, and so I think there's some kind of how you view their contributions and what you got out of them and stuff probably differs a little bit between the two of us. So it's always an interesting chat, and usually bassists don't ever get much love anyways. If you ever see any of the Death Clock cartoons, you know that the person who gets the shit end of the stick is the bass player. So it's cool to be talking about this one. Right.
It's always, the bassist always gets shit on.
Probably one of the reasons why I switched to rhythm. But, it's, I mean, of course, I guess you could say there were 5 bass players in Metallica from the kind of the official run, right? 2 of them, yep. Well, at least one of them really isn't on record unless you get some early, bootlegs. And then obviously the other one that no one ever kind of thinks of as, hey, he was in Metallica as a bass player. Is semi-official, of course, was Bob Rock. So, mm-hmm. I don't know how much we can talk about what Ron McGovney brought to the table, especially not from a official recorded studio thing. But I think probably the impetus of the guys you really wanted to talk more about is, of course, Cliff Burton and Jason and the current bass player Rob Trujillo.
Of course. It's actually funny because, my count was 5 as well, and I figured you might pull one out of your ass somewhere that I never heard about that did a tour with them or something, but so I'm glad your count is the same as mine.
Yeah, I'm not going to pull I don't think there's like a John Marshall version in the bass player range for that, but yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I get 5 as well, and I had actually forgotten about the whole Bob deal with Saint Anger, and it's interesting because some of that stuff, when you hear that stuff live with Rob on bass instead, it actually does have a much better feel to it. So it's that's kind of interesting for that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, that I got to say that one album, Saint Anger. I haven't listened to it all the way through, only because I just can't. It's just, to me, it is absolutely positively the worst thrash metal album ever made by any band at that level. It was just that bad for me. So, it's probably few people out there probably going, "Oh my God, it's great! The guy's a jerk." But hey, no, I'm sorry. Just for me, that album just didn't work at all.
Yeah, I think
so I can't speak much about his playing on other than everything that sounded like it was, drop tune as far as it can possibly go in a muddled mess. That's all I heard when I heard that album.
Yeah, and I think the like I said, when you listen to the stuff that was done live rather than the recorded stuff, you wish the album had that feel to it and not what it did. And of course, the other thing too, and probably the same for you, is that, first exposure to Saint Anger is also kind of locked in with the documentary and all that. So you also get this whole other, like, what the fuck vibe that adds to that. And I think that kind of doesn't play well for the album either.
Well, we're jumping ahead to the middle here. So we're talking about him.
Well, this is classic focus on metal right here. We like,
a rabbit hole, then we'll have to kind of rewind it a bit. But yeah, you're right. Actually, that documentary, I didn't watch that till years later, and I didn't mind that as much, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, but it just that wasn't hand in hand for me, so to speak.
Gotcha.
I was actually just joking at that point. I mean, when a band takes that long to make an album, it annoys the piss out of me anyway. Metallica kind of lost me between Metallica and Load, the Black Album and Load, 5 years. It was like, who took so long? And by the time when Jason left and they, of course, got Rob or whatever, I didn't know who was going to be bassist at that point. But when they were doing Saint Anger, I actually joked. I said, this band can just make an album with them farting and burping that'll sell 1 million copies. And I mean, I wasn't that far off, from that thought when they actually came out, and I actually was listening to what came out. I was like, oh my God, they sold 1 million copies before we hit the shelves, and it sounds like this, But that's just me. I mean, it's just, for me, their entire catalog, if you take it, that's the one thing that just doesn't sound like anything else. It's just the one thing that's that much off from the rest of the catalog.
Yeah. So why don't I'll take that cue from you. We'll roll it back to Cliff Burton.
Right.
Probably the most beloved bassist of the band.
No, you got to go one more back. You go to Rod McGovney, because we got to talk about how bassists get shit on. So he got shit on big time.
He did.
A demo, whatever. Got kind of kicked out of the band, whatever. So fast forward to Kill 'Em All, and now bang, now you get Cliff on board. All right, so now we got that out of the way. Yeah. So my first experience with Metallica was actually Ride the Lightning.
Okay.
So I didn't. I mean, I'm a couple of years younger than you, so I didn't really even know Kill 'Em All was out there. I was getting into metal. I was, going from like bands like Kiss to like heavy metal bands or thrash metal bands, and Metallica was one of the first. And get a copy of Ride the Lightning, and that was fantastic. And of course, I backfilled it right away with Kill 'Em All when I could find it. When I eventually found it, it was a re-release or something with the 2 extra songs on it. But, oh God, Cliff Burton's bass playing was just ridiculous for that era. It was just on a metal album especially, and how it was recorded. I loved it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with Cliff is that he had so many influences outside of metal. And I think that was probably, to me anyways, was probably one of his key contributions to the growth of the band, is that he was absolutely unafraid of pulling from any musical style, even classical, and bringing that stuff in and applying it tastefully to what they were doing, whether it was a bass part, whether it was a guitar part, whatever it was. I think that's a huge part of what Cliff did. And then the other thing is that he was a guy who played with his fingers as well, and not a pick. And a lot of them, metal bands, they want to have that like really driving bass and stuff. And so bass players tend to go over with a pick as well to do that. But Jason was one of these guys that was able to play with his fingers and be really eloquent with it. And, like even that kind of that Geezer Butler style and stuff, and little jazz things in there, and being unafraid of pulling in some effects and stuff as well. And I think, though, to me, his biggest thing is the fact that he could take influences outside of metal and start to insert them into what the other guys knew. Because, James is pretty much, he knew metal, new wave of British heavy metal and around the scene. Lars, same thing, some Deep Purple, some Shanker, but again, not like completely well-versed in any style outside of that. And along comes Cliff with just this encyclopedic knowledge of all kinds of shit.
I think you got to reverse time in general here. So anybody listening to this show right now, of course, has the full catalog of Metallica, and they're whatever age they are between, 20 to 60 or whatever, So they came into the band at whatever point in their life they did that. An album was coming out, and it could have been 2005. Someone was probably turning 25. You and I, we were there at the beginning, and the beginning also means that heavy metal was the beginning also. So the whole genre wasn't really pinned down like it is now. Not of the formula. Now things go a certain way. Back then, it was a total free-for-all, and bands were being signed left and right because they were fast, And so, that all being said, Lars and James, they were really big into the, new album stuff, and you had Cliff playing with his fingers, like you mentioned, and he also used a lot of distortion and like pedal kind of effects on his bass, which is really cool. It wasn't just a straightforward, I'm going to play bass, really boring kind of thing. I mean, the guy was, how do you even put it? He was a shredder on bass, and at that time that was not normal or heard of really either that I can recall. So just everything snapped to them. They were an angry young men, getting a record deal, 20 years old, 22 years old, and they were just flying high. So if you could add that energy and that youthfulness to the first couple albums, especially with Metallica, how being young and just that excitement that must have been going through them making albums,
Sure.
They weren't jaded yet.
And Cliff was also just like a total free spirit. He just didn't give a shit. He wasn't going to go along with anything he didn't feel like doing. He didn't try to, adapt to fit in, or it was kind of like either you liked what he did and how he was, or fuck you. And that comes right down to, who the hell in metal at that point was wearing bell bottoms? Only one person, Cliff Burton.
Yep. That's he didn't fit the look overall. The traditional look, I should say. He had his own look, which was metal, but definitely didn't fit that what was going on traditional, leather jacket type bands kind of thing that was going on back then. Definitely not.
No, and I think that most of the time when you talk about bass players in Metallica and stuff, almost everybody just instantly goes back to Cliff. I think even no matter when they kind of dropped in there. And the fact is that, he was the bass player during what everybody would consider to be that seminal time in Metallica. But his tenure was like, 4 years? Mm-hmm. Which, compared to the guys that followed him, incredibly short time. But I think also, I always feel like a lot of the albums, and more so the Ride and Master, are heavily influenced by Cliff, and they would not have been the same albums without him. I think that he brought a little to Kill 'Em All, and the same with Kirk, but those ones had kind of already been done live, and there was kind of a set thing that was done, an expectation of those. Ride was a clean slate, Master was a clean slate, and when you start to talk about Justice, I think there's some Cliffisms on there, but I think that's also where you, to me anyways, where you see, or it really becomes apparent how important Cliff was to the overall sound of Metallica, because Justice becomes this album of, well, how many more parts can we put into a song? Where, again, my opinion, if Cliff had been alive, he would have said, no, stop that. We don't want to do that. I think he would have reined a lot of things in, and you would have had a different album. I think some of the songs that are on there would be on there that he, had hands in doing, but I think it would have been a different sounding album. And again, like I said, to me, I think you really, when you listen to Injustice, you really see, just from a song structures, the influence that Cliff had. Not even the whole, where's the bass on Justice? I'm talking just songs and structure and sonics and all of that.
All right, so let's rewind a couple things. You unboxed a whole lot there. So, going to the first album, the Kill 'Em All album, clearly that was a Dave Mustaine album, from my opinion. I mean,
pretty much, yeah.
It was heavily influenced by his riffing and his speed, and just his playing style is all over that album.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, he wasn't eventually on that album. But so like you said, I mean, he had influence was different in that first album. Second album, by the way, Mustaine still had influence on a couple of songs.
Yep.
He had writing credits on a couple, but there's a lot of Burton on there, a lot of Burton writing credits, and a lot of his sounds and just how the structure, exactly what you said. And that, to me, Ride the Lightning is where they kind of gelled as that four-piece band. Those four guys kind of gelled at that band. Then you go to Master of Puppets, a little different animal, considered probably some of their best work. And although, I loved that album when it came out and still do, obviously they hit a different level of sound. They hit a different level of success with it, a broader audience. And, of course, the accident happens, right? Of course, Cliff had heavy writing on that and all that kind of stuff, too, and his presence was well known. But then the bus accident, and then boom, now we fast forward a bit, right? So now they're looking for a bassist. And Jason Newsted, who, by the way, doesn't suck. He, came from Flotsam and Jetsam, and you listen to their first couple albums that he was on, part of the first album he was on, and of course, writing credits for the second album.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't suck.
And a lot of us thought that, we would not hear from Flotsam again after Jason left. I mean, they're still around today, but initially everybody thought, oh, that's the death knell for Flotsam, which wasn't the case. But yeah, I mean, he was not, a shitty guy as far as playing bass.
Right, so that gets us to that point between Master and Injustice for All. I don't know where the disconnect happened, because they could have easily plugged Jason in, had him turn up his amp the way he normally would, be and sound and play, and just gel into the band, and he wouldn't have been Cliff, he would have been Jason, and things, I think, would have been fine. But I think what was happening there, too, was with the transition of CDs coming in. You went from that, album of being, 34 minutes, 38 minutes, whatever an album was, and all of a sudden, boom, you have the capability of 80 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I think that has played part of all music ever since. In the case of metal albums, 40 minutes of listening to someone scream and the solos and everything else. I mean, I won't say it gets old, but an end, making songs, having a definitive end at some point and condensing it makes you want more. When you start stretching it out and, like you said, adding parts, and just, to me, it's like a cut and paste. Hey, let's add a few more parts here, and hey, let's just paste this in. And I did like Injustice for All. I thought it was good. It wasn't fantastic. I was a tiny bit disappointed, but overall, it was still an okay album from my perspective. And you're right, I did hear the influence is still there, but clearly Jason was not given the ability to run free like he should have been. It was just my thought on that.
Yeah, I just think still when you listen to the structure of a lot of those songs on Injustice, it's just, what are you guys trying to do? Get all of a sudden progressive, where you had a little bit of a leaning to that with some of Master, and it's like, nah, you've just gone too far. And I think that's where, to me, again, where Cliff would have just kind of called bullshit on some of that stuff and reined it in, and it would have been a little bit more concise and probably more memorable overall. You
gotta kind of go back and put yourself back in 1986 to 87 to 88. Those 3 years. That's when things really, really, really exploded in the metal scene. I mean, 87 was the whole 86, 87 were. I mean, just metal bands are popping up a dime a dozen in every corner. I mean, it was just ridiculous how many were popping in there. So, Metallica is now saying, we got to compete with this, and label mates or different labels doing different things, and of course, bands like Queensryche were pretty prominent at that point and very technical and getting some success. So, I think they just looked at the whole picture. I don't think it was definitively Cliff, passing that made this change. I think it was the whole landscape of music in general and their desire to, succeed even more and have greater, which they did, by the way. The song One obviously, put them on the map.
Yep.
Differently, I should say, on the map at that point. So I don't know. I'm not so sure it was definitively that Jason came in that it all happened. I think it was just a pile of shit that all happened at the same time that kind of put that situation together.
Yeah, I mean, you might have a point with some of that. I would still argue that I think if Cliff had still been alive at that point and it came to that song One, I think he would have been, no fucking way are we making a video for this song.
I honestly don't know, because I don't know if the video is a function of the band not having money and couldn't do it, or just no popularity, or the record label didn't invest in them. I really don't know what's involved with making a video back then. But clearly somebody ponied some money up and said, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to push it to the next level kind of thing. I'm not sure how aware that came from. And who knows? I mean, maybe he would have bowed down. Maybe they would have picked a different song to do it with. But, one was a decent song to do it. It kind of had the slow parts, the fast parts, the solo parts a little longer, a story that people can kind of relate to, being based off of with the book or something, or the movie.
Yep. And for you Metallica fact buffs, that is based upon, of course, Johnny Got His Gun, which was actually a story written back in 1931. But the little video or movie clips that are in that one video are from the 1971 movie release.
So I think the parts were there to do something. I just don't know. I mean, honestly, I wish Cliff was there, because I think that album would have been that much better, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, I definitely think that it would have just been a much, much better album. If I were to kind of rate kind of how I prefer the pre self-titled albums, and I would say that it's Ride, it's Master, it's Kill 'Em All, and then it's Justice. That's just kind of how my preference has been. And when I go to grab one of those early ones, that tends to be where I lean towards as well.
Are you ready for this? I mean, I'll even Justice at the bottom for you. Justice at the bottom for me too, but I'll still put the 598 EP even above that. I know it's an EP, but still, I mean, it was something they did,
Mm-hmm.
and I would still even put that as being something I found more successful. And by the way, it was done quickly. It was done, like 5 days or something. They just kind of loaded their gear in, made the songs, and that was the end of it. It wasn't this big production, and quite honestly, it sounded okay.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show you don't have to have this massive production of 20 days to load the drums into the building, never mind play, as some stories have gone over the years. But yeah, Injustice is the low end for me of all that as well.
Yeah, I still just think that's, to me, that is what that album really showed, the importance of Cliff Burton beyond just being that, that bass player. And at that point too, when he was one of those guys that if you were a bass player up until then, you didn't really have a lot of folks that you would look towards unless you started to look at people like Chris Squire and stuff that really weren't metal, but you were looking at these guys that were technically adept, or like a Geddy Lee or something. And as far as somebody who's like from metal, I think Cliff was one of the first ones from kind of that, that new generation of metal that bass players could look at and go, fuck yeah, like I want to play like that guy.
But that's obviously very true. I mean, people look up at him as the benchmark to try to hit, as a bass player, I think, for metal. But going back to Injustice for All, we talk about bassists in general and how Cliff was missing from that album. Well, you know what? Jason was missing from that album. I mean, it was like where was he on that album? It's like they'd even put him in the mix, So aside from anything else, we can't even say how effective he was or wasn't on that album, because he kind of wasn't even in the mix.
Yeah, and it's even with I've got the large box set of Injustice that they did, really well done. All the box sets they did, or just probably some of the best box sets I've ever spent money on. But, part of my thing with Injustice was that, a lot of talk about having a lot of demos and things where Jason's playing would be more apparent and stuff. And even through any of that stuff, I just don't really hear it on there, unfortunately.
I've heard some YouTube videos of, fans have just added the bass in or whatever, and quite honestly, it does add some punch to the songs, and, probably wasn't Jason playing, it's probably just some random person doing it, but, it did make the whole album have a different feel to me, and granted, that's YouTube, so the quality is bad to begin with, and it even sounded better, so, there should have been some hope there, and,
yeah,
it would be kind of cool if they actually remixed the whole damn thing and actually put the bass parts in. Maybe for the 40th anniversary they'll do that. Who knows? I
was really hoping with the box set that there'd be something that would be like, like the Holy Grail that would pull it all together for me. But it still wasn't there.
Well, for anybody that's listening to this podcast that wasn't familiar with Jason Newsted before Metallica, just for whatever reason you didn't catch that, he came from a band called Flotsam and Jetsam, and their first album was in 1986 called Doomsday for the Deceiver. Go get it. Period. That's all I'm going to say. Great album.
Yeah, it definitely is. And he comes into Metallica. Obviously, I think he tried to bring enthusiasm and energy, and he still, and even James and Lars will admit readily now that they hazed the shit out of that guy. They took his grief out on him, and he still, he hung in there for quite a while. He was 15 years. He was the bass player from like 86 to 2001 before he finally said, I fucking had enough. But through all that, he tried to be enthusiastic. He tried to fit in. And he's a different kind of player as well. He's a guy with playing with a pick, and a little different way that the bass hangs on him, and using different basses and stuff, and more straight ahead in regard to amplification and stuff. But I think still, I think he came in a shitty time, and I think for 15 years he tried his best to try to keep some of his roots in place as much as he could. But I think overall, when you start to talk about bassists, I think Jason, for the Metallica faithful, I think Jason is the one that usually is more likely to get the finger than Cliff or Rob. Yeah,
it's unfortunate. Looking at the catalog here, he was only on 4 albums anyway, but as you said, I shouldn't say anyway. They only made 4 albums in 15 years with them. That's what I meant to say. That's ridiculous for that era. Especially, I'm going to be real again. This is Metallica. This isn't something, extremely intricate to do. It is straightforward metal, and I know there's parts, and I know you got to do whatever else you got to do in the studio, but it doesn't take 4 years to make an album. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Especially that kind of music. I can make an album like that every year. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's not faster. And I think most people that are musicians can very quickly. So they kind of lost me on that as well. It's like, how can you take people at this level? That's your job. It's all you do is tour and I would imagine jam with each other during sound checks and whatnot, and bring stuff to the table. How could you not have more content, good content, quicker? So I don't know if that played any part of it either. And of course, as we go from Injustice to the Metallica album, the Black Album, that's the one that put them on the universal map across the friggin' world for everything. And that to me was the end. I love that album, but I saw the end right there. The commercial success, the heads got big, everything just kind of went right down the tubes for me with that band right there.
Yeah, you get the Black Album, and I think one thing I liked about it was, sonically it sounded good, but it also, it harkened back to Kill 'Em All, where you had, shorter, a lot more in-your-face kind of songs on there as well. It was almost bizarre to me that all of a sudden everybody was into Metallica. It was one of these, like, what the fuck just happened moments.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just said the key kind of a key thing there. The songs were a lot shorter, too, more in your face, which is great. They also introduced drop tuning to this album, different tuning, I should say, a little bit half step, whatever, and I think full step on one of the songs. But, so a little bit different sounding there as well. But, Enter Sandman was just a follow-up to one, and, every band everywhere. I turned 21 that year, so I got into the nightclubs, and every cover band was playing Enter Sandman, so it was just, I got sick of hearing it real quick, and to this day, it's probably why I don't listen to that album, because I don't want to hear that song anymore. And the rest of the album's good, so I just got to get through that 5.5 minutes of, oh, Christ, not this song again. And it's nothing to do with that song, because that song was a good song. I'm just so sick of hearing it, But yeah, that did go back to, the shortest songs, but I just knew that success and saw how they handled that success, and now their head swelled huge.
Yeah.
And again, it took 5 years between albums. I don't know if that was part of the success of just hey, maybe we can't do this again. We don't know how to do it, or maybe it was hey, we made so much money, we're going to ride this out, or hey, we're cool, we can do anything. I have no idea what was going on in their heads, but that was the 5-year gap. That was just between Metallica and Load. That was just ridiculous to me.
Yeah. We know that there's a good almost 2 years worth of touring after release and stuff. At least when you got the Black Album, you actually got to hear Jason. And there were parts where, he was very, very present on the songs, and it started to sound like a band again, which was good. And I do like that part of it, that it's like, oh, great, I got to hear the guy and hear what he was thinking of and all of that. And I think it was unfortunate for him that he was in the middle of this huge audience changeover too, because there's definitely people that were like, nope, I don't want to fucking listen to him anymore. That, this sucks. The only albums are the ones before it and all that. So he lost a lot of people that probably would, if he had still been in Flotsam, they would have freaking loved the guy. And then he had this whole new audience that he was dealing with as well.
Again, the parallel to Flotsam, their album after he left was No Place But Disgrace, and he had writing credits on at least 2 songs on that album. And that album, I thought, in 1980, came out in 88, that album I thought kicked the shit out of Injustice for All. So he left the band, went to a different band that was supposed to be better overall and, more publicity, which it did have, but I think his old band kicked the shit out of album to album. I think his old band beat him, but that's just my opinion on that one. But going forward after that, I mean, yeah, I heard you hear him playing his parts on the Metallica album, and gotta be honest, moving forward to Load and Reload, you can kind of take both those albums together. And granted, they were 1 year apart, which means that all that content that is decided to put them out 1 year apart, you can make one good album out of those 2 albums, in my opinion. But each one individually leaves a little bit to be desired on each one of them. That's my thought on those 2.
Yeah, it's true. It goes back to when you talk about the combining the albums, and I always remember the joke he used to make about 2 of the latter Queensryche albums, and you even had your title and everything for being able to combine those into one good album, and it still cracks me up to this day.
Oh, it was here in the Q2K tribe. Because I took those 3 albums and put them together and took the best songs of them. Got to be honest, though, in all fairness, I've actually gone back and, because of lack of great music these days, I've gone back and revisited some of those old albums that that were fighting against fantastic albums at the time. So as a older person going back listening to them now, I've actually learned to like all 3 of those albums independently. But at the time, no, I was looking for the quick hit, because the quick hits were coming out all over the place, but yeah, that's a little rabbit hole in that one.
Yeah. But you're right. There's even been a lot of like, hey, were these all recorded at the same time? And is this like, okay, well, you had your stuff for Load and all the shit that wasn't good enough for Load, you put on Reload? Or, I think there's a variety pack there, which, again, I think people point to a lot of times, well, Jason fucked them up and all this, but I think he was just, at that point, along for the ride. I've got a career here. I'm gonna do my best and play my best and go out there and kick ass live and stuff. And at the same time, I think they were trying to do these other various like little extra like, we're gonna experiment with this or experiment with that. And then at the same time, if Jason wanted to go and hey, I want to go over here and do Echo Brain and do experiments, it was like, fuck no, you can't do that. So I think again, Load and Reload, they definitely didn't endear him long-term to Metallica faithful.
Again, you're unpacking quite a few things here, and let's rewind one thing. Let's rewind technology, okay? So back when they started in 83, 80, whatever, 84, making their albums in 83, they only had limited gear. They had limited money. They had, they were using the same shit forever, and they made it work, and they pushed it to its extreme, and they knew how to make that stuff work. Now you start moving forward, you start making some money, and now the entire world's opening up to you. Every toy that's out there, and I know from even borrowing your Zoom at one point, I must have played with that forever. I mean, I still have my standard Marshall and just the basic stuff I use with it. Had that one sound that I really like, but you start giving me toys, and I'm going to tweak forever. I think Metallica kind of got at that point too. They had money, they were buying new stuff, they tweaked their sound, they tweaked their gear, they had a better opportunity to record stuff. The way things were done was different. Electronics were different. I think they might have got it lost a little bit, and the fun of all that. It was fun. It was fun playing with stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. This day.
But again, that's where bands start losing their roots. When you start losing that 4-minute song, the straight up rock and roll, get your solos in, get the riffing in, have your message and be done. That's what works. Those are anthems. That works. And do a 10-minute song with 17 parts, and you think you're being cool. You're not. You can be. I'm not gonna say you're not, but you can be cool with it. But that's not what's expected from this band. It's not. That don't put them on the map. And I'm not saying they need to stay in that groove, but when a band strays too far from a groove, it kind of gets a little awkward. And I think the Load and Reload, I mean, honestly, I kind of liked a lot of the stuff on both of those. I just kind of wish they were combined, you know. But and I've done that. I've made my Load and Reload albums, you know, so taking off the ones that suck and putting the good ones on, and so I have a decent album out of it too. But shouldn't have to do that. That should have just been done for me, you know. My thought.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, you know, there's, I think, a lot of stuff going on just with kind of, you know, you get the advent of social media, you have the whole Napster shit that went down and all of that as well, that kind of put another cloud over the band at that point, which, again, Jason inherited that cloud as well. I think that further kind of skews people's view of him. And then, you know, at the same time, at the tail end of that, you actually have that the soundtrack song from what the hell movie was that from? But the I Disappear. And I thought that was actually a song that was like, okay, it to me, it almost took like the best elements of what they were trying to do on Load and Reload and put that into this other kind of punchy song. And I actually like that one. I'm
not even sure what song you're referring to. Which song is it? What's the name of the song?
It's the Metallica one. They did that song "I Disappear," and it was off. I think it's on I think it's from a Tom Cruise movie, if I remember.
Yeah. I didn't. I must have overlooked that. Again, that was the era, the mid '90s. I was past Metallica. When Load and Reload came out, like I said, that 5-year gap, they really lost me. You know? And then when Lars started being a little bitch about Napster, I mean, quite honestly, if there's any person that should have been slapped around about bitching about Napster, it was him, because back in 1982, 83, he's begging people to, you know, copy his tapes and give them to a friend so they can get signed. And pretty much Napster was exactly that, a way to copy things and, you know, and distribute them. And I realized it was abuse, and I understand it was, you know, illegal. And I get all those concepts, but the same concept was still there of finding new music. And I found a lot of bands that, quote-unquote, I got for free one album, and I went out and bought the entire catalog. Bands like 10 and whatever, I'm not going to name a whole bunch of them, but bands like, definitely that was one of them I absolutely recall. I heard one of their albums, and I was like, oh my God, and I went out and I bought everything. You know, so that's one example of how that worked out well. And I know it can be abused, I know it was, and I know why they don't want the music to be given away. But that all being said, it pissed me off so much that when Saint Anger came out, I put it up for free on my FTP site. Most people would download 2 or 3 songs and just stop. That's how I guess I was saying either my FTP was too slow, which it wasn't the case, or they just didn't want to hear anymore. So, for years I had it up there on my FTP site, and it's long gone, of course. But
what's interesting too about that song is if you should go back and listen to it, because I think what you're going to find is that there's a lot of elements in that one song that are part of their kind of what I describe as kind of their new era of Metallica songwriting that starts with Death Magnetic. And it's weird because you have that song with some of those elements in there. And then, of course, you got Saint Anger stuck in there, which is this clusterfuck. And then they kind of move back around again and continue with, you know, it isn't like it's an exact thing you're going to find on Hardwired or 72, but there's the elements and kind of the overall feel. It's like it's in that song. It's weird.
Yeah, I'm looking at the video really quick here too. I just don't. I mean, I'm just not recalling this song. I'm not going to put it on because it'll bleed into
just afterwards. Just check it out and see. But it's interesting, and that's kind of, you know, that's essentially Jason's final shot there too for the band.
Yeah, but still looking kind of young. I'm seeing the video here. All right. I don't know how that would slip through the cracks, but it did. You know, I know how it slipped through the cracks. I was just kind of down with Metallica. You know, even when they came back, when they made, you know, when Rob joined the band, I was unsure of that, and his playing style was, I won't say same as or similar to Cliff's, but it was definitely more aggressive than Jason. So I was looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think, you know, we can kind of move on to Rob as well. That I think a lot of people embraced Rob because, again, he was a fingerstyle bass player and not with a pick, and so he was able, I think, to faithfully do a lot of the Cliff stuff that way, and you have a certain feel when you play with your fingers as opposed to a pick. And so he has that, but I think also coming from Suicidal, and you have this certain other like groove that's in there as well. And when you start to have songs that have groove, you tend to, as a bass player, dig in, and you do kind of you have more accents and stuff, and you definitely call attention to yourself. And so I think Rob brings that into the mix as well. I mean, obviously you don't hear him doing that when he's playing with Ozzy, but I think that Metallica actually gave him enough freedom to be able to bring some of those assets into the band.
Well, the whole band changed, in my opinion. So let's take a quick look at Snapshot. So Rob's been in the band since around, 2003?
2003, yeah, like 21 years. Okay.
So 21 years he's been in the band, and they have 3 albums out since he's been in the band. It took 5 years after getting him on board to get an album out. I'm telling you right now, if I was in a band and we're making albums and, we replaced the bassist, it would be a priority to get a new album out with that bassist playing, or any musician in the band that was replaced, just because it would be a priority to get them feeling part of the band. It took them 5 years to get him recorded and released, which was Death Magnetic. And to this day, of the 3 albums he's been on, I still think that's one of my favorite one of all the 3. But again, what you just said, they gave him the ability to play, but the whole band changed how they play. The whole way they recorded, just everything was just more bombastic to me. And I kind of liked it, and Death Magnetic, as I joked with us, this is the best album they've had in 30 years, because I was going back to Injustice for All at that point, because it was whatever it was, 20 years I meant, not 30, 20 years at that point, because they didn't make anything good in 20 years, in my opinion, that good, I should say. So I did like Death Magnetic a lot. Hardwired, I thought was good as well, but as we kind of alluded to on one of our previous episodes, we kind of went down a rabbit hole with Metallica. 72 Seasons, I mean, it's just missing riffing, It's missing, it has chord riffs, but no, single note, finger picking kind of riffing. It's just missing that. It's way too long. These 3 albums are just, ungodly long.
Yeah, I think it's that, but you know what else is interesting is that, like Death Magnetic, and I think you really hear it on Hardwired, and I haven't really invested myself enough into 72 Seasons to fully call it on there as well, but there's a reliance again on like the bass to really have that foundation for everything to build on. Lars is a pretty straightforward drummer. He's not going to be doing paradiddles and stuff anytime soon. But I think you have Rob that really puts that thing down, and then everything just gets layered on top of him. So it's very traditional structure, where I don't think that Jason would have ever been given like that much freedom across so many songs to do it. But I think that part of in doing that you maybe have really hit on it as far as the missing thing on 72 Seasons, where now there's so much reliance on doing that they've forgotten about all these other little kind of go in, go out, this little single note lines and stuff that catch your ear and catch in your head and stuff like that become missing. And there's a little bit more complacency because he is that good.
Taking his playing style and just, how actually he is great. You're right. Taking all that taking the whole thing away. Bring it right back down again to technology. Technology's changed in a way of you're no longer recording on tape. You're recording on, it's all digital. Mm-hmm. You can literally cut and paste, move things around. I mean, recently, as I mentioned to you, I got into electronic music recording. I'm getting to that right now. So, it's so easy to just cut, paste, maneuver, and undo something and redo something that to me, they're past few albums like cut and paste. They really do like, hey, I like this part. Let's merge it with this part. It's, and I know I'm really belittling it, but that's what it feels like to me. Mm-hmm. It feels like that it didn't jam as a band and just drive it out as a band. It just feels like, hey, let's add as many change-ups as we can or whatever. It just seemed to be weird. The first 3 songs on 72 Seasons, I swear to God, they're the same exact tempo. It just was like one long song, and I'm probably off by a little bit, but not much. They're definitely right about the same tempo.
Yeah,
So
I don't think you're wrong on that. And it's and you're right. It does get easy, and you can go, okay, yeah, this is the verse part, this is the chorus part, and yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and repeat those over. And yeah, digital recording absolutely gives you the ability to do that all day long.
And it's not a bad thing. It's just you can get lost in overproducing, over manufacturing. You're over manufacturing a song, and I hear that all the time in music I listen to. That's why I don't like. I've never liked power metal, because everything is on the beat. There's no slop. There's no human feel to it. It feels so mechanical to me. I mean, sonically it sounds fantastic, but it all sounds just there's no variation to anything in it. It's just straightforward. Everything is precise.
Yeah, I mean, I like power metal, but I get what you're saying, and I think probably what you like too is the fact that when you start to humanize a song and you don't have everything snapped to the grid, that little bit of difference actually adds to an element of aggression, because part of aggression is like that not knowing, that spontaneity and all of that. And I think when you start to have that not solely based right to the grid, you start to feel that in the music.
I go right back to, even being in the band with you. The way what I loved doing in the band is jamming. That's how songs were made. You had some songs, you had stuff written down, you had parts, you had lyrics written down, you had parts already worked out on guitar or whatever, and, but you guys all had other pieces together. I brought something in, but the thing was, we all worked on it. Like, I'd play a riff, or you'd do something, or Jeff would do something, or whatever, and next thing you know, boom, Rick would do something, and away we go, and to me, that's how I enjoyed the creating process. Sitting down, doing a guitar part, and then, me doing the bass part, because I'm doing drum, guitar and bass, and me doing MIDI drums or something. That's just one brain thinking one direction. That's not collaboration at all. And collaboration, I think, is the greatest growth of anything. You throw something against the wall and someone else expands on it, and that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, that is my preferred way to want to write as well. It gets much harder when you're doing it by yourself, and it isn't as fun.
I just don't hear that in the Metallica albums, And by the way, going back to, again, Metallica, didn't they acknowledge they made a mistake with Jason? And when Rob came in the band, didn't they, make him a partner instead of an odd man out? And didn't they give him a bonus or something, too?
Oh, yeah, they did. And that's all in the movie, too. I think like $2 million or something to do that, and he was like, what the hell? And I don't know why that belonged in the movie, but yeah, they did acknowledge that between grief and substance abuse and just kind of fortune, fame, and being dicks and stuff, that yeah, they were really unfair. And also even James has even acknowledged, even recently with interviews and stuff, that yeah, he should have just stopped being a dick and allowed Jason to go off and do stuff with Echo Brain and stuff, and realize it has no bearing on Metallica, and it fed a need that the guy had to do some other type of music. And yeah, there's been a lot more of like going back and saying, oh yeah, we were kind of assholes.
That's part of growing up. I can't fault anybody for that. I mean, I can look back at things I call myself an asshole that I did in my life, or thought I was being right at the time, and it's just human nature, I think. But it's just too bad it didn't work out beneficial to them. It worked out in the bad way in some cases. So I definitely don't fault them as much for that. But going forward, they have the opportunity and ability. They're all millionaires. They're all, have nothing but time to do this kind of stuff. And they can, any band at that level can make a great album. It's a matter of just, I guess, figure out what's great to them and to other people. So clearly they want to make what they're making. They think it's good, and I just don't share that vision with them anymore. I don't share that the direction they're going. I still like the shorter songs, more human feel to it, and a little bit of angst to it. That always catches my ears.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm still, I've gone to all the last tours, and I'll go to the one this summer as well, and I will say that the bigger reaction is for those older aggressive songs. Even you watch the people that are there, and there's even like younger kids and stuff, and they're actually more apt to be into those older songs as well. And maybe part of it is the fact they know that their parents really love them or whatever. But I think that they really do have a much bigger reaction out of those shorter, faster, more aggressive songs.
This also does break into the other thing. I know the other topic we were going to get into, which we may roll into right now, is how, well, maybe not, but how sonically things have changed.
Yeah, we're going to do that in a whole other episode.
All right, that's fine. But just to touch base on it really quickly. And I don't mean to add a pun there, but let's touch base on it really quickly. You know, sonically these days, drums sound way better, and bass, everything's like just fatter. Back in the '80s, drums were sounding like, you know, a bass drum didn't sound like much of anything. It's like somebody hit the pillow, you know. So having a bass guitar fill that gap was a little bit, I guess, you know, more common, you know. So I think that's the difference in recording techniques from then to now, and how that's changed how we even perceive bassists, or just bass in music in general. I mean, by bass I mean low-end drums and bass, you know, or anything, even keyboard if you put that as a layer somewhere deep. You know, it's just sonically we can do a whole lot more these days. So that's definitely changed how everything's done.
Yeah, definitely.
But we'll go too deep on that because I know that's a topic we want to get at.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a topic for a much longer discussion. But for this one, I said I think what's interesting too is why this one really appealed to me when you suggested it, was that when you really start to go through it, that it's like the history of Metallica can almost be directly tied to their bass players. And people would think, what's a bass player? But I think in this case, whether they're the loved bass player or the one that's the not loved bass player, I think their history parallels their changes in bass players.
Yeah, it does appear that way. I also, I look at the first few albums as, how do you even say this, but with Mustaine being in the mix and his influence, I mean, that influence was there for a while, and their feud kept both those bands, rolling against each other and in general. And to this day, I mean, I still think Mustaine, more riffing, the band's more consistent with putting stuff out, and whether you like him or not, as a person or even as a musician, that's a whole different story. But, I think people that have contributed to Metallica over the years have push the band or nudge in one way or the other.
Yeah, I think there's also the thing of, and I would say that actually even this podcast is a kind of a parallel of it, is that, we first started this thing and it was this kind of hungry, let's get out there, let's, really push the show and all that. And there's this drive and there's a need, and we had things where we were, I won't call it contractually obligated, but we were obligated to get a show out every week. And there was a lot of stuff that was driving to that. And now we're at this point where it could be that, you know what? I just don't feel like making an episode this week. And there's no, I don't have a record label. I don't have Elektra telling me, well, you owe us an album. It's
right.
I've got Blackened recordings that I own, and I can tell myself, well, you don't have to make an album for another 5 years. And so I think it's a little bit of a parallel there, where here we are, 13 years later, 14 years later, that, it's like, no, I'm not putting a show out every week. And it's, this drive and aggression to do it out constantly and all that. I'm not doing an episode every 5 years, but, I think there's a similar thing there. And I think that you kind of touched on it a little bit too, is I don't see them really probably jamming very much. I think everybody's off there doing their own shit, and there's probably not a lot of, hey, let's get together and just freaking play. It's probably get together to rehearse or get together to do some pre-production, but there probably isn't a lot of just, hey, let's just fucking go to the warehouse and just jam. I don't know. I can't envision it.
Let's put it in the same parallel you just said. When we started, when I jumped on board with this, I came on a tiny bit late. You guys already started rolling with the podcast, and the hunger was to get out and get noticed, and back then there weren't a lot of podcasts. Back then, if you had Cakewalk or something like that, Pro Tools, whatever it was, and could put this together, you could do it, and the internet was still fairly younger, and blah, blah, blah. Now, fast forward, we're actually dinosaurs. We're doing it over the phone. People do the same thing with videos, and video podcasts are everywhere, and so we're that dinosaur in the tar pit right now talking about this. So, but again, we're not as hungry as you mentioned because you've already had the success. You've already had 580 or 90 episodes at this point, 85 episodes, whatever it is. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. But again, I still think I'd like to find the roots. I want to go back to the Crush Metals. I'd like to get some songs put in here. I would still love to get back to that stuff that made it fun, those different segments within the, at least fun for me, those different segments within the episodes. And quite honestly, it'd be great to get feedback from people who listen to this and have listened to it, and you probably get it, I don't. I'd like to hear what these people say, what they like for a format, what they like to hear, what topics they enjoy, which also brings up that we've killed every topic worth talking about within reason, I mean, over 580 episodes, what else is left to talk about, I mean, I'm making fun. I'm sure you can always find something, but everything's not new like it was. We've kind of been there, and I still enjoy it. I still think it's fun. Now with more nostalgia at this point, talking about things, how things have changed over the years, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different landscape change too, because I mean, when we started this, like you said, there weren't a lot of podcasts out there. We're probably one of the longest running ones at this point. But now, and you got to also remember that when we started this, if you were to tell somebody you were doing a podcast, almost everybody gave you this look like a what?
Yeah.
It really wasn't part of the vernacular. And now you've got, major, entertainers and people are doing podcasts, and whether they're audio or they're visual or they're both, and so it's kind of a normal media thing. And I think also what you get is where before, where there weren't a lot, you would have listeners that would pretty much every week, they were listening, they were responding. You were kind of part of their weekly life. And now there's so much out there that they probably look at stuff, and you're going to obviously have listeners that listen every week regardless. And, we're available on, over 40 different platforms at this point that I know of. Every one of those platforms has a shitload of shows, but I think you also see is there's going to be people that are going to only go and listen to a topic if they're interested in it, as opposed to, always being religious about watching it or listening to it every week. And I think you're going to have people that, they listen for a while and then whatever, they find something else that they prefer. And there's only so many hours in a week that people want to listen to shows. It's free, and it's not like, you're obligated or whatever. So I think there's just so much that, it's like the tide,
I agree. And, everything's oversaturated these days. And the fact that even some listeners are listening, or however many we have, it's fantastic, and I think it's fun. But, I can actually bring something up. So we did an episode recently, 2 episodes. You broke them into 2 parts because it got long-winded. Did you purposely stop the episode when I was talking about how you got to flip a cassette from side A to side B, because you kind of stopped right after that and called that, part 1, in essence, part A, side A, and then the second part of the episode the next week, which would have been side B. Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah.
I thought so. That was kind of funny. I listened back to it. I was like, you should be. That was funny.
Yeah, this sometimes you try to find this pause or whatever, and that one was I can't pass this up. So
yeah. Because as I was getting towards the end of it, I was like, wouldn't it be funny if Scott ended it right here after we talk about side A and side B, had to get up and flip it, and you did. I was like, oh my God, that was so funny.
Yeah. It's every so often I hit something, but yeah.
Well, this is the 5 bases of Metallica. So one of which was never really heard from, one of which I wish I never heard from, and the other 3 are all in the mix. So
awesome. Wow, we got this done in just just under an hour.
Well, that's the mandate, right? I'm trying to be a little more cautious about the rabbit holes because, we start talking and I start running. So.
Yeah, that's half the fun.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Well, it's great to talk to you about this one. I know we've been, binging back and forth a couple of weeks on it now, and I'm glad that we've got it in the can.
Yeah, that'll be nice. Looking forward to hearing it out there, hearing it in the wild.
Yep. See, told you that was going to be a long one. And, when you start to listen to Jay and I talk as well, if you weren't one of the listeners way back when we started this show and you would hear Jay and I every other week, you really don't know kind of where our split was on metal. And I think, as the weeks go by and there's some more appearances by Jay, I think you might kind of get where he ties in and out and how he differs from Richie and myself. And I will say that Jay is the guy that originated the phrase that you've heard often on the show here, when a singer leaves a band, I'm done. So he is pretty much that OG band kind of guy. So hearing how he's discussing the three bassists in Metallica, knowing also that pretty much he's, makes it no secret of where he really was disappointed in the band. This is, ends up being a pretty good conversation. So I hope you enjoyed this week's discussion. And as always, thank you very much for continuing to listen to Focus on Metal. Can't believe that, we're approaching 600 episodes at this point. People still tuning in, and the show continues to grow. And that's really a tribute to those of you out there listening and supporting the show. But for this week, that's it. There ain't no more. Stick a fork in it. This puppy is done. So for Jay, Richie, myself, and everybody else here at Focus on Metal, have yourselves a great metal week. And until we talk to you again next time, as always, remember...
Focus on metal!
Everything else is insignificant.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.